Meg Scott Phipps, and be 62 years old next month. And I was born and raised in the Hawfields community. Lived there most of my life until recently. First school I went to Burlington Day School we didn't have kindergarten in those days. So I went to Burlington Day School when I was 5, but for first grade I went to Alexander Wilson.
How long were you a member at the church?
All of my life, from the very beginning when I was born, and until now I'm still a member.
And what kind of activities did you do? Did you do youth? Did you do scouts?
I don't remember scouts being there at the time, Girl Scouts being there at the time when I was young. I did do the youth because the church in those days was where our friends, pretty much, our close friends were when I was in elementary school.
Can you tell me more about the youth group?
In about middle school age and some of high school, not too much in high school. We sort of, as a lot of young people do, we sort of grew out of it. But my biggest memories were going to Camp New Hope in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have real strong memories of going to Camp New Hope, which is near Chapel Hill. And in those days, that seemed like it's so far away, like that we just went on the longest trip to get there, and it wasn't. But we would be gone for a week, as you know, and it was just a great experience staying in those cabins and meeting with all those, making new friends there and all that.
How often and where did you go for meetings?
That I don't really remember. In fact, I don't remember it so much as a formal thing. You know how
right.
These days you met on Sunday night and you went over to the church.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't remember that, but we must have had meetings where just the youth got together. I distinctly remember Sunday school. We always went to church on Sundays and had 9:30 Sunday school and the 11 o'clock service.
Can you tell me more about what you did in Sunday school? I know that's a big part.
Right. It hasn't changed over the years too much. We had the lessons pretty similar to the kinds of things that you would have had. Another big thing was Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big program when I was growing up, and we had Vacation Bible School during the week, and I think that it's been shortened now, but we would have it for the week, and we would go, of course, go up to the church every night for the programs. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I remember that was very big was the annual Halloween party. And would have it, some of it would be outside, and mostly it would be in the basement of the fellowship hall. But one of the scariest things is the haunted house room that we had. And that haunted house room was in the basement of the fellowship hall in the back. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is when you come down the steps to the basement of the fellowship hall, it was in that room, and you went in one door and came out the other.
Yeah. Is that where they had the, you stick your hand in and then you don't know what you're doing?
Right, that's right. The spaghetti kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. But the younger kids, I don't recall, were allowed to go in there. It really was for the older kids because it was pretty scary. And it would be dark in that room. But other than that, the Halloween party was very similar to what you would have experienced.
Right.
Now, as a youth at church, though, there are two things that we had that you didn't experience. In the fellowship hall, the main floor was a basketball court. Mm-hmm. And it had one goal over on the side where going towards the kitchen, where the two big windows are up there, and that was a wooden floor, just like a basketball court, and that was a great experience for going over there, like on Saturdays and having games and playing. It really was like a community center.
So basketball was held indoors?
Yeah. I mean, the basketball goal was in that main room of the fellowship hall. It was a basketball court room.
Yeah.
So the other thing was we had a swimming pool at the church.
Yeah, Billy told me about that. We got some pictures.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
And when we were little, that pool seemed big.
Oh yeah.
That seemed like a very normal sized pool, but as an adult, I realized, and it may even be Billy who sort of told me this. It was more of a wading pool, but it did have a slant, where a slanted entrance, where you walk down to a little bit deeper end, and so it just seemed like a big pool, but it wasn't.
It looked about knee deep, if that.
Yeah, that's probably right. The main thing that was so different in our day as young people compared to for your experience is the church was the center of our community, because we didn't have fast food places. When we drove to town, we drove to town only on Saturdays. And we would go load up in the station wagon without seatbelts and go to Graham to the movies. You just didn't drive every day to go somewhere.
Right.
And we all rode the school bus to school, to Alexander Wilson. The other community memory I have is that occasionally in the spring, we would walk home from school just for fun, going through pastures and all that. And it was about 4 miles. Coming up that dirt road, that's not a dirt road anymore.
Governor Scott Parkway, whatever it is.
It was very rural, unlike today.
Right. Did you have any stress about walking on the roads at all?
Didn't even occur to us.
Okay.
And I will tell you that is different from when my children were growing up, because we rode our bikes on that dirt road, and on the road we would ride our bikes down to the interstate on Cherry Lane. We would ride our bikes over to our cousins on Jimmy Carr Road and spend the day and come back. We would walk out in those fields and pastures for all day. And when my children were growing up, we didn't let them do that.
Right.
So it's just a different culture and mindset and awareness of things that could happen. I suspect TV had a lot to do with that.
Right.
Another thing to add about being a member of the Hawfields Church in that community all my life is that as an adult, after getting married, we actually lived in the house I grew up in. So I basically literally stayed right where I grew up all those years.
And did you ever stay at the governor's mansion? I know Mom was telling me that you invited her for a night.
Yeah, we lived there from 1968 to 1972. Or January 1969, I believe it is, to 1972. So we lived there and went to middle school in Raleigh.
Okay.
And we would come home some weekends and go to church.
And can you tell me about that, how you're related to Ralph Scott, and get into that?
Ralph Scott is my great uncle.
Okay.
He was my dad's uncle. And of course, they lived on Highway 119. One of my early memories there is on Sundays after church, it used to be quite common that that your family went to someone's house for lunch, and you would sort of stay the afternoon. And sometime we called him Uncle Ralph, even though he was a great uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we would go to Uncle Ralph's, and they would have as many as 30 people there for lunch, Sunday lunch. And that's where I learned to drive when I was about 11 years old. He had a big old Chrysler with push-button gears, and you pushed a button for park, drive, neutral, and we learned to drive a car when they were like 11 years old in his driveway.
How significant was that for your great uncle to be the governor?
Okay, the governor was actually my father.
Okay, so Ralph Scott is not the governor.
That's right. He was
okay.
the state senator.
Oh, okay.
He was the state senator, and then my dad, Robert Scott,
right,
was lieutenant governor from 1964 to 68, and then governor from 1969 to 72. And that's why our family lived in Raleigh. I'll give you one history thing that happened to us in the community. It would have been 1966 or 67, before Martin Luther King died. But over on Cherry Lane, near where you live, in the house that we grew up in, we had a cross burned in our yard.
By the KKK?
And I distinctly remember it, and we saw it, and it was on a Saturday night, because the next day we were leaving to go to camp at Camp New Hope.
When do you think the KKK really died out? Was it the 80s? Was it the 70s?
Maybe sometime after the civil rights era,
right,
in the mid-70s, but I don't think it's ever died out.
Okay.
There are people who are still members of the KKK today. Yeah. But it's not, they're not as brave to come forward.
Yeah. I know there was more than 10 million at one point.
Good grief.
That's amazing.
That's a lot. It is.
Do you have any pictures of that? I think can be
we
implemented.
don't. Of the cross being burned, we don't. I have a very vivid memory in my mind.
Okay.
Because when we, and I say we, I'm talking, I have 3 sisters, and I had a brother who passed away, but we remember it. And it was dark, and it was at night, and the cross was burning way down in the yard towards the road. And when we came back from church camp that week, after that week, the charred cross was still in our garage. So I have a memory of that, and had been in a concrete block, how they had set it up in the yard. And so that concrete block and that burned cross was still in our garage. And
where was it burned at? Was it, when you're looking out from where you used to live, was it to the right or the left of the road?
It was actually in our yard. But
in your yard?
In the yard. And when you're looking out from the house, it was down towards the right. When you're coming from your house towards Cherry Lane, and there's the first driveway into that house. It's sort of a horseshoe driveway. The first driveway to the left on the pond side, it was near that driveway, but it was in our yard. I distinctly remember the interstate being built. I think it was one of my earliest memories.
Okay.
And we would ride our bikes down to Cherry Lane, where the Rouses lived down there at the end of Cherry Lane where it crosses over the interstate and the putt-putt place is on the left.
There was a putt-putt place?
Well, there wasn't when we were there.
I-85?
Yeah, the I-85
Oh, okay.
golf place.
Okay.
Okay, of course it wasn't there back then, but we would drive down there and watch the interstate being built.
Right.
And we would ride our bikes down there. The other thing that we normally did in our youth was we would go to our cousin's house, or our cousins would ride their bikes over, and we would ride horses that we had.
Right.
And we would ride the horses up and down Cherry Lane. And the main thing that we did was, because there were so many of us as cousins, we would play in the big white barn there quite a bit.
Right.
And just make forts out of the hay bales, and had little clubhouses and what we thought were secret hiding places, but all the adults knew where they were.
Right. And what is that white barn today? Has it changed at all, or is it just abandoned?
It's not abandoned. It is owned by somebody else, but it hasn't changed at all. Like, to go inside, you can still see the barn the way it was. Mm-hmm. And we would go up in the hayloft, which is huge. We would go up there and play a lot. Another thing that we did a lot as kids is go down to Back Creek.
Right.
And swim and just play with groups of friends down there. One of the significant memories I have was our father building a raft for us out of a closet door. I think tractor tire inner tubes under the under the closet door, and he tied that all up, and he took that raft all the way down to Back Creek, and my sister Susan and a friend of ours, Steve Scott, who used to go to our church. He's not a relative. He is Anna Scott's son, Steve Scott.
Okay.
Susan and Steve were the first ones to ride on it, and it went so fast that they ended up having to jump off. And so the raft went on down the creek and got hung up in some trees. So our dad had gone to all that trouble to make that, and it only worked for one trip.
It was too fast.
It was too fast, but it was a lot of fun and one of our strong memories. But that also, we did go down there a lot, and we had our secret places as friends that we named, and those places were like Fat Man Squeeze, Treasure Island, Blackbeard's Cove, and there were a lot of boulders down there on that creek. Mm-hmm. And even in high school, sometimes we camped out down there. So that seemed like a long way off when we were little, and today it's really not that far down there. But as kids, that was we would just spend hours playing down there, and then coming back through the pasture where the cows were. But now that's that subdivision, the Hawfields subdivision's back there. Mm-hmm. But that's where we played. Another thing that we were active in was 4-H. The 4-H program was not associated with the church, but it was at someone's home or different places. But we would show, we have fond memories of showing our calves and cows in the cow shows for 4-H at the district fairs and the county fairs.
I know Tripp did that.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell me about the time you were the head of Christian education and how that was affecting your life, how you changed, and just all that?
I really enjoyed being head of the Christian education at Hawfields Church, and it was, there were just enough young people that it had to be one group, not the junior and senior highs. Mm-hmm. Everybody had to be together. So that was a little difficult because, middle school kids like different things than the high school kids. I did love planning the events and planning the Montreat retreats and doing those kind of things with all the young people. It's busy at holiday time.
Yeah.
It's interesting what I really realized, although you know it if you stop and think about it, because but what it really hit me while being the educator is that church is such a seasonal activity, around the holidays.
Yeah.
It's based on Easter. It's based on Christmas. Thanksgiving. So the events are all geared to that kind of thing. I will mention one thing that's a personal opinion, a personal statement that is not shared, I think, by other people in the church. But you know how in the sanctuary there are flags in the front of the church?
Yes.
Like the U.S. flag, and I forget what the other one is. Is it the Presbyterian flag?
It's something? Either the Presbyterian or the North Carolina. I don't know if it's still there, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it was the U.S. flag and then maybe a theological or a Presbyterian flag. Mm-hmm. But that was not always done. That was not always in the church. I'm not sure when that changed. It might have been around the 80s. I'm not sure, and your mom might remember, but it's my personal opinion that the government flag should not be in the church, in the church sanctuary. As a Boy Scout, you may feel differently or haven't given it much thought, but that is. I never really voiced my opinion about that, but it's the one thing that I don't think that historically or as Christian theology that a government flag should be in the sanctuary.
Right.
I think the Boy Scouts should be part of the church, and I think we should support our country and all that. I love history, and I love the fact that our church is older than our country, but God is over all the earth and our church, and that is a Christian place and not a government kind of thing. Does that make any sense at all?
I see where you're coming from.
Okay.
It's just
I think some people don't give it a thought.
Yeah,
really.
It is.
It's just there.
It is fairly new. Within the last couple of decades, the church has been involved with some type of government. I don't know why.
Yeah, and it's important because we certainly want to have Christian values in our nation, but I just think in the church sanctuary, that's God's place and not a government place.
Right.
So that's just a personal statement. And that's one viewpoint of one member of the church, and that's it. But anyway, I really enjoyed being the Christian educator. It's a lot of work. And I really do think, though, I have 4 college degrees.
Yep.
But I do think that position requires somebody like Mandy, Ealy, that is trained in Christian education. Mm-hmm. I think that's a necessary thing. The Presbyterian Church has always believed in education, so it's always that's one reason that our ministers and our educators are educated, not just volunteers.
And just one last question about the Christian educator. When was do you remember the first time you went to Montreat and what year and how that was?
Probably 2008. as a leader. Now that I just love Montreat. In fact, now that we have moved, our family has moved to Lake Lure, which is just south of Montreat, and I just love that whole campus there. I love that auditorium. And as a counselor for our chaperone for the youth for that week, it was just a wonderful experience having the youth to go to that and to have those morning meetings or what do they call it when you meet in the auditorium?
Keynote.
Right. And then the breakouts for the different programs and all that stuff.
Right.
It's a great experience. They don't have programs necessarily for the adults while the youth are in their meetings and in their groups, small groups. So we get a nice little break while y'all are off doing those other things.
Is there any other positions you took on? How are you involved with the women and all that?
I didn't do too much with the women of the church as an official organization. I didn't become an officer in there. I was an elder in the church. I'm an inactive elder in the church right now, but when I was elected as an elder, that is a very interesting experience and something I would recommend that probably most members should get the opportunity to do, because that shows how really democratic the Presbyterian Church is run.
Right.
We aren't dictated to from the top down of the National Presbyterian Organization. Each individual church runs their own church. So that's a very interesting experience.
Right.
And I hope you get that experience someday. I think you would be really, really good at it. But right before I became an elder, we used to have the church governing was done by deacons and elders. Right. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yes.
The deacons, and the deacons tended to be the younger ones.
Right.
Like in their 30s and 40s maybe, and then the elders were, as the word implies, elderly.
Right.
The older ones in the church. But the deacons tended to be the really hardworking people, younger people that kind of got things done, and the elders governed the church by advice and making policy and those kinds of things. But right after that, the USA, Presbyterian Church USA, decided just to have elders, and that was probably a smart move, just to make it one group.
This is actually a cool fact from history. Most of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence or Presbyterian. So that I thought that was cool. I'm just going through confirmation right now. I know it's kind of late, but
well, that is I think you would be amazed at how many governors of North Carolina were Presbyterian, and I think you could check a good number of the presidents of the country were Presbyterian, but it's primarily, I think a lot of that is because the Presbyterian faith believes in education and educating their leaders. They also believe in a democratic government. And so a lot of our United States government, the Constitution and all that, is Presbyterian based as a constitution and how we run our country.
How we can amend stuff. Is there any questions I'm not asking about, government and the church?
This is something that might help you. I don't know how big of a project you have to do. I imagine as an Eagle Scout, it's pretty big. or to get, go for the Eagle with your...
Well, it depends. I took on a huge project, so...
Yeah, and you probably are going to have to rein it in, because it could be far-fetching if it gets to the community as well as just the church.
Right.
But tell your mom and your dad that you should look for this. My dad, before he passed away, was working on updating the church history.
Yeah.
And was supposed to have worked on the second book after the Turner book.
The Church of the Old Fields.
After that book. And he interviewed people.
Okay.
And there's a box of his interviews and transcripts of those interviews, probably in one of the storage closets in the fellowship, in the
historical
building.
room?
No, I don't think they ever put it in there.
So it's in the library?
I think it's in... When I saw it, because Dad had just passed away around 2009 or so, but it was in the storage closet in the education building across from Mandy Ealy's office.
Oh,
and it's
where they
just
keep the vacuum cleaner?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a refrigerator in there.
Yeah.
It's just a brown cardboard box.
Okay.
And it's he had some of the transcripts written out, already typed out by somebody, and then there's just some tapes. But like he interviewed Dr. Plexico, Curtis Fussell, Carol,
Troxler?
Carol,
Fisher, okay.
Interviewed her, and just the ministers since that book was written, and also people in the church, I think. But there's a lot of history there that just hasn't been never put in the new book.
Right.
I don't know if they've moved that. You could ask Mandy. I don't know if they've moved that over to the history room. But that's where it was when I last saw it. It's hardly even marked. It's just a cardboard box with those things in it.
Okay.
That could help you.
Yeah.
Without trying to track down some of those people from the 60s, 70s, the 50s, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think their interviews talk about change in the community.
Okay. And that has part of like the written stuff too?
Yeah. Some of those tapes that he did, he had them typed out.
Okay.
He got someone to type them out.
Yeah.
The transcripts. So that's, that would be right there for an automatic research for you.
Yeah.
And if y'all can't find it, let me know, because I could talk your mom into... you could find it. You probably know more about that closet than your mom does. Just by being over at the church, quite a bit. But.
Yeah. I don't know how comfortable you are talking about your family, but just starting with your dad and your mom, can you tell me about them?
Great couple, very young at heart. I grew up in the 70s, 60s, 70s. TV came on board. It was the civil rights era, women's rights time period, and to use a phrase from back then, my parents were pretty hip and groovy. So they were great parents to have. They were in politics at a very young age. Dad was lieutenant governor at the age of 34.
Right.
And then governor at 38, age 38. And so they were very involved in politics. They were progressive and leaned on the liberal side of politics.
Right.
Everybody was a Democrat back then. And that was probably one reason a cross was burned in our yard, because he supported civil rights.
Yeah.
But we just came from the political family, even though we grew up on a dairy farm.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather also was governor. So he grew up, my dad grew up in that political family, but grew up on the dairy farm there. Mom was very active in women's rights and the Equal Rights Amendment, which she lobbied for that and worked for that in Raleigh for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, and it failed by one vote. So that was very, very disappointing to her.
What year was? What do you know? What year?
I don't, but I want to say in the 70s.
Yeah. Was that
when
women were not allowed legally vote in North Carolina?
Actually, our Constitution didn't allow it until the 70s, but we voted. The North Carolina women could vote back when it was in the 1919 or 1920 when the U.S. Constitution was changed.
I think it was 20.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they've been able to vote, but North Carolina didn't change their constitution until around 1970, 71. It just stayed in our constitution, but they were allowed to vote because the federal government said you could. So it's interesting. I grew up with parents like that. I always saw them as very nice and humble, but very active in the church and in their progressive beliefs. They were very close friends with your grandparents and loved Hawfields. Your grandmother, Barbara Smith, was one of Mom's best friends, and that's just was a great friendship, and that's how we got to know your mom growing up, and your aunt and uncle. So just the salt of the other great family.
Can you talk about your grandparents more?
And my grandparents, as I mentioned, W. Carr Scott, he was a governor and a United States senator.
Yeah.
And he died when I was 2 years old, so I never knew him. I did know my grandmother, his wife, who was Mary White Scott, and she lived in that house next to the big barn. But she died in early 70s, so she died when I was kind of young, and I just remember her, as a child from growing up.
Do you know what age you were when she died?
I probably was about 16 years old.
And she donated all that land to the Presbyterian homes, right?
That's right. And the reason she donated that piece of land was the house that she was born and raised in was on that property.
Mm-hmm. She was still living there, wasn't she?
No. The house that she lived in is the one that's next to the big barn on Cherry Lane.
Okay.
Yeah. So the house where the nursing home is, that's where the house was that she grew up in as a child, back in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm. And she went through, the 1920s and all that, right?
Yeah, but my parents stayed pretty active, and then my dad became the president of the North Carolina Community College system.
Yeah.
And he did that for about 10 years, and that was actually his favorite job. He liked it better than being governor of North Carolina. And when my dad was governor, you could only be governor for 4 years. You weren't allowed to run again. So after we lived in Raleigh in the governor's mansion for 4 years, we moved back home to our house on Cherry Lane.
Mm-hmm. And how long did you stay there before you moved to the mountains?
Yeah, he still had the dairy farm, and he had the dairy farm there until about 1986, I think, or the early 1980s. And around the country, farmers were losing money and having to sell their farms, and he was caught up in that. He was one of those that had to sell their farm during the early 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So, as there used to be quite a few dairy farms around Alamance County, but they're not anymore. I think the Covingtons are one of the few that are still there.
Right. I think there's only like 2 or 3.
Yeah. So, and that's another, I'm completely changing the subject here, but it made me think.
It's a great area to farm.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
The land. In fact, Dad always told us that there's volcanic soil underneath that area where we live there on Cherry Lane and near y'all. And so farmers couldn't grow tobacco there. That's why no one right around there grows tobacco.
Okay.
And so they had to do grazing cows and growing corn and soybeans and all that because the soil wasn't suitable for growing like tobacco. So that's the reason there aren't tobacco farmers. There were black families. The Lloyd family worked on our dairy farm for generations. And for me, when growing up in the civil rights time, when there was segregation and we had black and white schools, but the Lloyd family, they were our closest neighbor. So their kids, we didn't really as children know there was a difference or a separation. Now, we knew they worked on our farm, and they weren't farm owners, but our parents never told us there was a difference.
Right. So you were good friends with them?
Yeah, and still good friends, like on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
So we just didn't know the difference. And one of the people I know, their father, Freddie Lloyd, was almost like a brother to my father.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going off subject here, but it makes me think of something else. We were at elementary school in those days, and there really weren't any neighbors as such around the farm, so they were our closest neighbors. And we knew they didn't go to our church. They didn't at first go to our schools.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until we moved to Raleigh in middle school at Daniels Junior High, and that we started having the busing and the desegregation.
Right.
For us to think about blacks and whites going to school together, it just didn't occur to us there was a difference. And when we started going to school together, it really didn't matter. As you can imagine, it doesn't really matter to the young people. That's sort of the way we were. Busing occurred where they tried to make the schools more equal, and I distinctly remember being assigned to different schools, and you would be quote-unquote bused to those schools to try to make the racial makeup of the schools to be more balanced.
So were you redistricted at all?
Yes, but not in Hawfields. The schools were so far apart. But in Raleigh, I was. I probably would have gone to Broughton High School with most of the people that I went to middle school with. But we were bused to Enloe High School. I went to 10th grade at Enloe High School in Raleigh. And then after that year, we moved back home. And I went to Eastern High School. Did
you go to Enloe when you were in 9th grade as well?
No, their middle school was 7th through 9th grade.
Oh, okay.
So it was...
I know it's a whole lot different.
That's right. So 10th grade, I went to Enloe High School as a sophomore.
Yeah. Do you remember when kindergarten was implemented? Was it during your school career?
It was while I was in school, and I think you can ask your mom if she went to kindergarten, but
I think she did go to kindergarten. I think Ellen Lawrence was her first grade teacher, and she would not talk.
Your mom would not talk?
Yeah.
That would be surprising, because
Yeah,
your mom's a great conversationalist.
Yeah. She had to call her on the phone just to get a word out. It was funny.
That is funny. The daycare, I remember the daycare getting started at Hawfields Church, and it was, started in the church.
Yep.
It was a long time before there was a building there. But when I was little, we didn't have daycare.
Yeah.
At all, because our mothers stayed home and raised us. Women didn't work in those days.
Yeah.
The women's rights thing, and Mama worked so hard on that. In the 70s, I graduated from Eastern High School in 1974, and then I went to Wake Forest University in 1974 and graduated in 1978, and went to law school after that, and I was one of 10 women in my law school, in my law school class.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so long right before that women weren't even permitted to go to a law school, to some law schools, or veterinary school, or go to medical schools. So my career was a product of the women's rights movement. Because we were allowed to apply and go to school and go do those things. So I'm making myself sound really old, but actually it just wasn't that long ago that all these changes took place. Of course, it was pre-computer too, and and we only had the regular stations on TV, kind of thing. Different culture.
How do you think the TV changed your life? What was it, about the 60s that it was popularized?
Yeah, and it was black and white. So, and then you only had the 3 channels. You didn't pay for TV because the ads on TV paid for TV.
Right.
So you just had the antennas and the rabbit ears, and you had the 3 channels at the most. ABC, NBC, CBS, I guess. And we watched Ed Sullivan on Sunday night, those major, the Andy Griffith Show, all those I Love Lucy, the black and white shows. Those were the only things that were on TV. We would go to the movies in Graham on Saturdays sometimes. Our mother would put us in the station wagon and drop us off. And it cost 25 cents
right.
To go, and you could get a drink and popcorn for about 15 cents. So you're talking about TV changing, even in your life, how much it's changed just since you've been doing computers and phones and all that.
Oh, yeah.
And it consumes our entire information feed.
Yeah.
And it's natural, but I also think when people think the world is a much worse place today, in a lot of ways, I think they think that because they're more aware of it. When we didn't have TV, you just weren't aware. You didn't find out or know about all the bad things going on around the world, or it just wasn't reported. And you didn't hear about it. Now it's instant news, so we know everything that somebody says, thinks, or does. So it's amazing what's changed just in 10 years, actually.
And I know this is off topic, but I'm really interested in how you think has changed since you grew up in a time where the screen was invented.
Well, I'll tell you one big thing for me, and I noticed it. It just stands out. when I was in Atlanta this past week, is using the Google Maps or the GPS.
Right.
How in the world did we used to get around to find a place that we hadn't been to? And we used real maps.
Right.
And I loved real maps. I went to the North Carolina Outward Bound School, which is something you ought to think about doing.
Okay.
And so I did that when I was right after college and right after law school. And you learn to go, they give you the topo maps, and you go from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And you have to find your way there through the woods. And it was a three-week trip. But so I like maps, real maps. But I don't know how I would drive without the phone talking to me and telling me where to turn. Right. So that's one of the biggest changes ever. And the other is instant talking to people overseas. I have a sister that's in Singapore. They're missionaries. Mm-hmm. And so they use the WhatsApp for text messaging, and they Skype their children on a weekly basis and just see them right there. So it's not that far away for them because they can see them. Right. Whereas normally if they were halfway around the world, they would hardly ever hear or see for them children, except for the writing of a letter or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, here's one difference that TV has caused. I majored in history, so I love history. Mm-hmm. And most of our old history is documented. It's written. People wrote letters, so you got the daily stuff. You found the daily news and daily life that way. Yeah. Well, we do everything by voice, and by the phone. We do document by Instagram, our Google pictures, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But they're gone. They just will end up being gone. Right. And so there's no social history as such that's necessarily being collected, that you're going to have to rely on your memory down the road just to pass on things that you remember from your youth and all that. So unless when you switch phones or upgrade, they keep everything for you. Well,
I use Google Photos. I know when you buy a Google Pixel, you get unlimited storage on there. So that's one thing to think about. You can save your photos online in the cloud.
It is. But that's one thing that I don't like, and I'm going to sound like an old person. But but it concerns me about the Big Brother aspect. Mm-hmm. Of our communication now, how anyone could get into your life by technology. So anyway, it's going to be interesting. Not that it would keep me from moving on with technology. I just think that's something your generation's going to really have to deal with.
Right. Okay.
Now I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
Which could be a question that you would ask of me or anyone you're interviewing. Okay. The Hawfields Church, it's such a historical place, but how do we move forward in a technological society? Right. And it's a shame because the tradition of going to church on Sunday, you will be able to make those choices yourself when you're in your 20s and when you go to college, mm-hmm. and when you're in your 30s. Right now you go because your parents, it's part of your family tradition of going every Sunday, right. And part of what your parents want you to do. So how does church move forward? The fact that Hawfields has an app, it's a big deal to me, right. Because I don't know that I would make a contribution now that I'm away from, not physically in Hawfields community,
Right.
but by having the Hawfields app, I can make a contribution sitting right here on my couch.
That's right.
So I think that's a big plus for our church in doing that. But the old church and the old traditional Sunday 11 a.m. service, I don't want to see that let go entirely, because I think people like the comfort of the tradition. Does that make sense?
And I do think that people are busier now that, we have tools to communicate and set up, meetings and such. So the fact that we even have 2 services is amazing, and some people can't do Sunday. So that's why we're starting to implement our services online. And just by doing these simple things and putting it on the internet, sharing via social media, that's going to help just getting into our generation,
It will. And it'll make someone like me not feel so guilty about not being there on Sunday morning.
Right.
Because that was what you're supposed to do. We're trained that you go on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock.
Right.
So, yeah. Are they doing that? Because I'm interested in that.
And they have a YouTube channel, but it only has, it's got under 10 subscribers. So as time progresses, that will become normal for us. I do think we're behind on online presence.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. But it's hard to move forward when you don't have the audience to take it.
Right.
To be interested. But see, I need to know that because I have 3 sisters that live away from the church now, but are still emotionally and historically tied to Hawfields Church. Like, I suspect we'll all be buried there.
Yeah.
So they would be interested in knowing about the YouTube. So it's a taped recording of the service?
Yeah. We're starting to do live streams.
Mm-hmm. So you would get on at 11? Like, watch it at 11 o'clock?
That's what I'm thinking. Now, it's not on the YouTube channel that it's live streamed. I think it's on the app.
Okay.
But I'm looking at the YouTube channel right now. It's got the last service was posted a day after it happened. So if we can make it live and have better quality, these mega churches are on top of things. We're just not, doing what we need to as far as putting our services online,
Well, and mega churches have money. Let's just be honest.
That's right.
They have money, and Hawfields used to have money, but a lot of the big benefactors have passed away, and people just don't have $10,000 checks to write anymore.
That's right. But
but the desire's there, and fortunate enough to have a minister that has the capability,
right,
the knowledge, and but I would watch it now that I know that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that day.
Right.
That's good to know. I'll check the app about that.
Billy Mebane films it in the top pews. So if you just look up Hawfields Presbyterian Church on YouTube, you can find their channel. It's got a big H on it as their profile picture. So,
okay.
But,
I'll do that.
Yeah. Something I'm trying to push for is online presence, and I do think we have the resources to do it. It's just we're not doing it.
Yeah.
Because if you think
it takes a lot of work to run a church.
It does.
It does. And a lot of time. And so that is really good to know. But another thing is to find a way to let those of us that are away from the church but grew up in the church know that it's there.
Right.
That it's an option, because there are young people that are not young to you, but they're in their 30s.
Right.
That grew up in Hawfields Church that probably are not attached to or attending churches where they're living now.
Right.
And they could still be attached to Hawfields with that connection.
Right.
So anyway, good work. That's That's good to know.
I'm kind of slowly working with David. I'm on the AV crew or whatever. So we have a slideshow now. I don't even know if you know that.
I don't.
Yeah. We have 2 projectors in there now. It's pretty neat.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is.
You know, we're slowly climbing up the hill, so.
Everything helps, and sometimes it seems frustrating when you people just don't realize how much work it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But you just have to remember there are a lot of people that don't want to come to church to work. They want to come to church just to feel the comfort of church. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, just have to let that go and dig in, like you say, and move forward bit by bit.
Any questions I'm not asking that you would like to tell?
No, but that was it. That last thing was important.
Right.
Moving the church forward into a technological age.
Right.
And that's been a discussion for 10, 15 years, but it just has to be the willingness and then somebody to do the work. But thinking about where we'll see church in and of itself when in the future, when it's still important to keep those historical roots, because for me, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I think that I am sixth generation of my family to be a member of Hawfields Church. Mm-hmm. And my children are 7th generation of Hawfields Church. Yeah. And once they left to go to college, that was it for them. They aren't back in Hawfields. They're not going to come back to Hawfields.
Right.
I intend to come back to Hawfields. Robert, my husband, and I will come back to Hawfields. And we'll probably come when we're old and can't move around, and be at the nursing home, right. and then be buried at Hawfields. Since we've lived there all of our adult life, and I lived there all my children's life as a child, I wanted to be able to live somewhere else for just a little while. So that's what I'm doing now. Okay. But I'll be back.
That's right. Well, if you have any pictures to send, I'll need all that I can get. I've been scanning left and right of all the, the picture books in the historical room. So.
Okay, and definitely check for that box.
Yes.
Ask Mandy and David.
Yes.
About the old cardboard box of interviews that my dad, that Robert Scott had done on the history of the church, but was never put in to the book, a next book.
Right.
They probably know where that box is.
Okay. And
that'll help you. Okay, and I'll look for pictures.
All right.
Okay.
You can just send them on your message app.
I will.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Enjoyed it, Tolar. Tell your mom and dad hey.
Thank you.
Okay.
My dad's right here if you want to say hey.
Hey! How you doing, man?
Oh, y'all hang in there. Come see us.
All right. You take care.
All right. All right. Thanks. Bye.